Hi, welcome to Unity Now, a podcast where we discuss all things Unity 2020. This is episode 3, where we will discuss potential candidates for the Unity 2020 ticket. My name is Zach Rhoads, and I am happily your host today. I'm filling in for Nick Carey, who does a magnificent job of hosting the program for his part, and he is also wrestling with power outages in his area after the hurricane right now, so we wish him well. We have 2 guests on the show today. They and I will be discussing preferences for candidates to run on the Unity ticket in the 2020 election. And before I introduce those guests, I'd like to do the courtesy act of not assuming that just because you're tuning in that you know what Unity 2020 is or that you know who I am. So let me offer a potted background about the Unity 2020 movement and then who I am, and I'll introduce the guests. Unity 2020 is a grassroots presidential campaign to restore patriotic, courageous, and capable leadership to the United States. The Unity movement is a plan to reclaim our government from the false choice presented to us by the corrupt duopoly of the Democratic and Republican parties. Learn how Unity 2020 has been designed to avoid pitfalls of previous alternative and third-party presidential campaigns. You can go to articlesofunity.org. My name is Zach Rhoads. As I've said, I'm an educational consultant and I'm an addiction counselor, and I've written books about these topics. I host a podcast called the Social Exchange Podcast, where I interview guests about social issues and issues related to psychology. And I became concerned about the state of our nation a couple years ago when I realized just how difficult it can be to have an opinion about something public, however rational, because what you're saying is not easily assimilated into the standard narratives that and when that happens, you're liable to be accused of all sorts of things that you're not. So this has happened to me, and I've realized that this has become ubiquitous, and it makes it difficult to voice opinions or to be collaborative. And for this reason, I'm concerned for the future of our republic and for our ability to have critical discussions with those whose worldviews may be different than our own. It's not every day that I'm asked to host a program on behalf of our potentially endangered republic, so it's a task I'm honored to accept. Before introducing today's guests, let me fill you in on what exactly we'll be discussing. The Unity 2020 proposal is this. We, the people, draft 2 candidates, one from the center left, one from the center right. And once elected, they agreed to govern as a team. And all decisions and appointments will be made jointly in the interest of the American public. It's only when they can't reach an agreement or when a decision does not allow for consultation does the president decide independently. The Unity 2020 candidates will fulfill 3 criteria. They must be patriotic, they must be highly capable, and they must be courageous. So after 4 years in office, the order reserves for the next election, and reverses for the next election. This continues until the American public chooses an alternative administration or one of the members of the team can't run for re-election, at which point a new patriot would replace them. So that's our plan. We're sticking to it. If you want to learn more about Unity 2020, visit the website articlesofunity.org. We are currently in the process of nominating and then voting for 2 candidates, which of course needs to be done in short order. We're aware of that. My 2 guests today are both Unity 2020 volunteers, members of this team and movement. We'll talk about their ideal candidates for the Unity ticket and their basis for being boosterish about these candidates. So without further preamble, I bring you today's guests, Dan Jones and Brendan Bacon. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being with me.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks. It's a pleasure.
Dan's nominations are Mitch Daniels to satisfy the center-right side of the ticket and Tulsi Gabbard to satisfy the center-left. And Brendan suggests that Unity run William McCraven on the center-right and Andrew Yang on the center-left. We will, of course, be discussing your basis for choosing these candidates. Let's quickly meet the panelists. I'll begin with Dan. Dan, can you give our listeners and viewers just a bit of background about you, where you're from, what keeps you busy, and how did you become involved with this movement?
Yeah, sure. So I actually am also an education consultant, higher education consultant, and I live about half the year typically in Malaysia and China, traveling around for my job. And So just got back from there. I got involved with Unity because I had actually been working on an article that was very similar to Dr. Brett Weinstein's, uh, that he posted on Medium to kind of announce the Unity movement. And I had been working on something very similar, like a similar idea. So of course I don't have anywhere near the following or platform that Dr. Weinstein has. So I basically just jumped on board with him as soon as that happened, and vowed to support it as well as I could, as much as I could.
So you came to a lot of these conclusions on your own before hearing Brett talk about them.
Yeah.
And Dan, how do you identify with regard to political beliefs? Are you left of center, right of center, something else?
Yeah, I would call myself right of center. If I have to be pinpointed, I call myself a classical liberal. So conservative, classical liberal, center right. Yeah.
Excellent. And Brendan Bacon, same to you. Who are you? Where are you from? How did you become involved with the movement?
Yeah, so I'm from the Bay Area, California. I'm going to be a college student at UCLA. And yeah, I've kind of been paying attention to sort of like the intellectual dark web, kind of, sort of the new political ideas that have been, that we've seen over these past few years. And so, yeah, when I heard Brett Weinstein was coming out with this plan, I thought that this was a really good idea to, like you said in the beginning, try to challenge the duopoly, try to challenge the powers that be, and really try to awake people to what's going on, who's in power, and what we can do about it.
And where do you place yourself politically, if that's even applicable?
Yeah, so probably somewhere in the middle, maybe a little bit more conservative on the economic issues, and a little bit more liberal on the social issues. But yeah, just pretty much the middle.
Since we have some momentum, Brendan, I'll ask you to kick us off. Your two ideal candidates are William McRaven and Andrew Yang, and these are actually the candidates who were originally suggested by Brett Weinstein when he began the movement. Why do you see these as two ideal candidates, and in what ways do they satisfy Unity's main criteria, which is that they be patriotic, highly capable, and courageous?
Yeah, I think first of all, they're sort of known entities in the Unity 2020 community and beyond. I'll start with McRaven. Um, McRaven served in the military and the Navy as a Navy SEAL, and then became the Chancellor of University of the Texas System. He's very well spoken and inspirational, with a couple of his speeches going viral about hard work, dedication, trying to set goals, trying to be the best person you can be. He has a lot of integrity and near universal respect, which I think is something that if you're going to convince Democrats to vote for someone like this, they're really going to want someone who's the opposite of Trump. And I think that McRaven is definitely someone who fits the bill in that respect. I think he's also could be similar to the next kind of President Eisenhower. Eisenhower was the general of D-Day, and I think that McRaven has that same sort of qualifications. Where he's coming from as a Navy SEAL, and I think that he really understands. The Republic really understands the values of this country, and is perfectly willing, capable, and able to uphold them. In terms of Yang, I think the message of this election and the 2020 candidates for the Democrats were you wanted someone who's very diverse. That was the whole. You had people like Kamala Harris, people like Elizabeth Warren, people of color, women, and you got the two candidates at the end were Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. Two kind of old white guys, and I don't think a lot of Democrats really wanted that. I think Democrats wanted someone who was more diverse. I think Andrew Yang definitely fits that bill. He's also data driven. He's popular on the left and on the right. He understands the problem of our time. He's been on podcasts like Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, Ethan Klein, and Eric Weinstein. He's willing to listen to the mainstream voices on CNN, but he's also willing to listen to people who on the internet who aren't who don't have a nightly show. So that's kind of my decision making for those two candidates.
Fair enough, and let's revisit that in just a moment. Dan, I turn it to you. You believe that Mitch Daniels and Tulsi Gabbard would be an ideal ticket given the parameters of what it takes to be a candidate. So will you talk about your candidates and why they satisfy the criteria for Unity 2020 presidential candidates?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'll start with Tulsi Gabbard, who's a congresswoman from Hawaii. Um, To me, a huge part of our candidacy is the tone and tenor. I think the tone and tenor, as we like to say, of our politicians is awful. It's probably led by Trump, but it is really strident, rude, um, presumptuous, all around. It is nasty, and to me, anytime I see Congresswoman Gabbard speak with somebody, she's very calm. She's very slow to, anger or any kind of quick reaction. She's a deep thinker. Um, on a foreign policy standpoint, she's kind of typical of what the left's been for the last several decades, which has been pretty anti-war, pretty anti-intervention, which I like. Um, she has she has those left wing bona fides, which is that she wants universal health care and things like that, um, and a lot of other sort of left wing standard positions that I actually disagree with. But I think it's important that we have people who have those ideas in order to attract the left, because that is where the left is in the United States today. So I'm willing to kind of accept those things, and I believe that she is someone who is open minded enough that she will actually sit down and maybe listen to a conservative's perspective on what might be some of the flaws of universal healthcare or any of those other issues. So I think she's radically open minded. I think radically open minded is really key. And I just think that she has an incredible tone and kind of a very soothing way that she goes about making her points very effectively. Mitch Daniels, which would be the center right, is somebody that I have thought about for years, who I believe would be a great candidate for the Republicans. He was governor of Indiana from, 2003 to 2013, 2005, 2013, I think it was, two-term governor of Indiana. He is currently the president of Purdue University. Mitch Daniels is somebody who has always been very soft-spoken. He rejects the sort of strident politics of our age. He was a coalition builder as governor of Indiana. I think he even requested that Republicans just stay away from social issues for a couple of years so that they could work on things where they could make progress, because the social issues were just there was no way to make progress on those things. He's the grandson of Syrian immigrants, which so he has that kind of immigrant story in his family background. He wants to make the State of the Union kind of a thing of the past. Like, he doesn't believe that the president should be going in front of Congress and giving a big partisan rally speech, basically, which I think is brilliant, and that's actually the way it used to be for many, many years. He has conservative bona fides. He turned around a huge budget deficit as governor of Indiana. And as president of Purdue University, he's given some really inspiring commencement speeches. So General McRaven was one of those, or Admiral McRaven was one of those who got a lot of attention because he gave a really great commencement speech. Mitch Daniels has one that's kind of rivals that. It's also very good, and he talks about freedom of speech being under attack and things like that. So I like Mitch Daniels a lot. He's also somebody who has resisted the call to be a presidential candidate many times. They've tried recruiting him. The Republicans have tried recruiting him many times, and to me, that's a good sign. That's a good sign, because I don't want somebody who is actively seeking to be president, and I kind of believe that, somebody who genuinely wants to and actively seeks to be president of the United States or even a member of Congress is almost a little bit deranged. I mean, for someone to want that kind of problem in your life and that kind of spotlight on your life is, I kind of question your sanity a little bit. So to me, I think it's really important that Unity drafts people who haven't shown such desire to be president of the United States, and I like that about Mitch Daniels.
So does the fact that Mitch Daniels, it's clear that he probably had a road into further politics in his life. You've selected two candidates that are both active in the public eye, and especially on social issues. Tulsi Gabbard is indeed a politician. Mitch Daniels has seemingly hung up a career as a politician. you're thinking that it would be a showing of good faith if somebody who is has a distaste for politics now in his life and is on to broader horizons, that if he came into the fold, it would be obvious that he would be doing so for good intentions.
Exactly. That was the case with George Washington. George Washington did not want that job. He knew that it was going to be a problem for him, but he accepted the call. He knew it was his duty, and they wanted him to be president, and he did it. And he did a great job.
And you mentioned that for reasons we could talk about, but anybody who's willing to go ahead with a presidential campaign within the legacy system of the way that we nominate candidates, you have to wonder if there's something about that person that we should be questioning, just about their temperament and personality in general, by virtue of making that decision to go ahead with it. What would be different about electing candidates through unity?
Yeah, what would be different about electing candidates through unity? And yeah, that's basically it. I mean, if you look at some of our last few presidents, I think you could make a very strong case that you have like people who are narcissists in the president in the White House, and I don't think that's the kind of quality you want in a leader. But these are people who like the sound of their own voice, and they are really proud of themselves, and I don't think that's a good thing. So through the unity process, what's brilliant about that is we are drafting people. They aren't coming to us to sign up. They aren't coming and submitting their names to us. We are going out and finding them, and they are going to have to take a leap of faith, and this may not work out. And so the nature of that, where we are going out and asking them, and it is a groundswell of Americans from not some political party, not some party heads somewhere, just American people saying, "Hey, I've watched you, I've listened to you, I've read your books, I've seen how you've lived your life. I think you should be president." I think that changes. That really changes the game in terms of who you're going to, what kind of character you're going to get in your next president.
And now, just one more question for you, and I'll turn it back to Brendan. But Tulsi is a politician. She did, or I suppose actively is running for president. I'm not sure where she falls in that now. As a Democrat, what is different about Tulsi Gabbard, who is a politician, who is running for president, who doesn't demonstrate the personality features that you'd be worried about in somebody who's going ahead and running?
Yeah, that's very true. One thing is, I don't think I personally don't think that you need a president or a vice president who have political experience or who have sat on a congressional panel or anything like that. I don't think that's necessary, but I'm willing to concede that a lot of Americans do believe that you need somebody who has that domestic policy and foreign policy experience. And so she does have that, but her character and the way that she discusses issues and the fact that she doesn't just go on one network, or she doesn't always just go on MSNBC or CNN. She'll go on Fox News or some of those other networks or podcasts that are not from her party. So she's demonstrated that she is radically open-minded, number one. And as far as her wanting to be president, I don't know. I guess if anybody were to tell me that, look, I don't really want to be president, I'm doing this just for my country, I would believe Tulsi Gabbard, because she's actually gone and risked her life as a soldier for our country. So I would she has proven before in her life that she's willing to go out and put her life on the line, put her reputation on the line for our country. So I believe her a little bit more when she says that, a former soldier.
Brennan, Dan's hitting on some of the keynotes that you mentioned and what you would be looking for in candidates. And by the way, please feel free to just discuss with each other or ask each other questions. I certainly don't want it to be like a debate panel or talking heads or something like that. But I'll just ask you: do you see Dan's candidates as being reasonable and fitting criteria? And if so, why is your choice somewhat superior or more would be more beneficial?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I definitely see the merits of Tulsi and Daniels. I guess so. I'll start with Tulsi. I think when you for Unity 2020, you need people who essentially, don't or scandal free and don't have any problems with, with the narrative. And the problem with Tulsi, and this actually has nothing to do with her, it's the way she's been portrayed. If you look at, according to Hillary Clinton, she's a Russian asset. There's an article in The Nation about, well, she's not an asset, but she's, really this nationalist who just has these radical views. And, there's been talk of, oh, well, she's going to run as a third party candidate and that's going to, mess up the election. So my issue with Tulsi is that if she runs kind of as a third party candidate, she, is essentially proving these people right. And obviously, she's not doing it on behalf of the Russians or anything crazy like that. But they can just, take that narrative that they already created and just run with that. They can kind of discredit everything that's been going on. So I guess my concern, with Tulsi is how would that be handled? And I guess that's a question, I'll put to Dan if you want to respond.
Yeah, it's actually a great point, and it's the number one thing I worry about with Tulsi. And I'm very cognizant of the fact that both the center right side and the center left side have to choose someone from the opposite side that the opposite side is willing to accept. And so for me, like I see similar problems with Admiral McRaven because he doesn't really have those center right bona fides. There's really, as far as I've seen, I haven't seen any evidence in his life or his career that suggests that he is center right. He spoke very positively about President Obama on several occasions. He, of course, served President Obama as a military advisor, so you can sort of understand that. But there's nothing in him and his career I believe that suggests that he is center right. So I think conservatives or people on the right would kind of look at that as like, wait a second, you're not giving me center right, you're giving me two center left guys. But it's a valid criticism, Tulsi. My gut tells me that there are enough. I believe that there's a majority of Democratic voters who don't buy that she's a Russian asset, a Assadist type person. I really find it hard to believe that the majority of members of the Democratic Party believe that. But Brendan, maybe you're right. They may have made that stick, and I could be wrong on that, and that will be difficult for her to overcome.
Mm-hmm. In regards to McRaven, I mean, yeah, when you hear him talk, he doesn't, say anything overtly political. So I guess, we kind of assume he's somewhere in the middle. But I mean, I think generally people who have served in the military, I mean, the classic sort of stereotype is that they're conservative. Again, I don't know if that's exactly true with McRaven, but I mean, the sense, I get when he talks is that, he is more on the conservative side. And, maybe there have to be some, backroom discussions to see, well, where does he exactly lie on the spectrum? But I do think that there are a lot of Republicans out there who, maybe they like the policies of President Trump, but they really don't like, the person that's behind those policies. And I think that with McRaven, you're definitely getting someone who's, of the, highest integrity. And I also think that's something that's going to appeal to Democrats too, because one of their main things is going after Trump's character, right? Well, he's a corrupt guy. He's has all these problems with foreign countries, and you can't make that judgment about McRaven because there's not even a shred of evidence. So that's sort of my thinking behind it by Admiral Raven. In terms of Daniels, what do you think separates Daniels from just another conservative governor that maybe most people haven't heard of? What do you think are his defining features in that respect?
I think his defining features are it's really a lot about his tone, the tone of his rhetoric and things like that. He's never been somebody who's been a firebrand. He does not the guy who goes out and throws red meat to his supporters to get them fired up. I believe he was kind of a unifier in Indiana. And like I said, there was a lot of Republicans in the state legislature who wanted to, pass new restrictions on abortion, things like that. And although he is pro-life, he basically said to them, look, let's focus on things where we can find some agreement and make some progress, because we clearly are too far apart on the abortion issue. So let's just set those things aside. That's very rare these days. And again, the fact that he has resisted time and again the Republicans to come, hey, please come, run for president. We really need you. And he says, no, I'm not. He probably, I believe if you talk to him, he would probably sit down and say, I know that if I may be a good guy now, but as soon as I have to, play the games of the Republican Party ticket, it's going to corrupt me. Um, One more thing I'll say about Admiral McRaven is that, I think that we are at a pretty anti-war, anti-intervention moment, and I think that's true of the left and the right. I think even on the right, Trump claims to want to end the wars and things like that. The left still kind of is pretty anti-war, anti-intervention. And Admiral McRaven took out an op-ed, and I think the New York Times or Washington Post, criticizing Trump's withdrawal from Afghanistan. So he's somebody who wants to continue our military presence abroad. It seems like, which I think would turn off center right and center left. He also took out another op-ed defending John Brennan and talking about what a great guy former CIA director John Brennan was, and I just don't think that that's true, and I think that would turn off a lot of center right people who believe that John Brennan was doing things improperly. And regardless of what you think about Trump, I think that most reasonable people think that there was some funny business going on with the FBI and CIA with that, and he was part of that. So for him to go out and defend someone like John Brennan, and the CIA, which is also not a very popular agency in the United States right now, that concerns me a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What I'd like to do is discuss this in sort of a different realm or with different context. A couple of the things that I'm hearing both of you say, which is to be imagined that we're sort of rallying around this set of logistics, so we would have more in common than we would have in disagreement when we were talking about these things. But two main points that I've heard are that we're looking for candidates who understand that they have blind spots as human beings. We all know it, but who will also demonstrate that they have blind spots and be willing to collaborate and know what it looks like to stick their neck out in a collaborative process on behalf of people. And we're also looking for people whose values usurp any pressure from mainstream media or silliness from things on social media or what have you. One interesting thing about this conversation or this entire movement is that we're sort of asked to do what I frequently ask my students to do when it comes to self-development, which is to put aside reality even for just a second. If you could just daydream and think about what our ideal candidates are and what makes them ideal candidates, and forget about political strategy, we get to say, all right, what would this look like, and what would this process of selecting them look like? It's a nice thought experiment. And of course, I'm not putting aside the fact that if we're serious about making an imprint on the 2020 election, we need to do this in rush order. So talking about political strategy is going to be sort of the name of the game here. But if we get back up and just talk about these candidates in terms of what they bring to the table, and just forget for a moment, if it's possible, what the implications are going to be when the public sees that they are running under the ticket, or how persuasive they may or may not be. Could we talk just a little further? I had you guys do a summary of why you think these will be excellent candidates. And Brendan, maybe I'll turn it to you first this time. Just on the basis of what makes for good leadership, why your two candidates, and we could just put aside political strategy for now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the whole theme of Unity 2020 is, finding people who are willing to cross, party lines in order to get things done. And I think that, Andrew Yang has done that countless times. He went on Ben Shapiro's podcast, and I think that most people on the left, really wouldn't do that. You've seen, Ben Shapiro, many liberals would just, think he's like some, crackpot conservative, just totally, out of this world. And I think, the ability to really just sit down with someone and, talk about it, someone who, obviously they have numerous disagreements, but I think that shows, that shows a lot of character, and that shows that he would be a good leader, and he could work with, someone like McRaven or, whoever, the center right candidate might be. In terms of McRaven, I think that the fact that he praised Obama is, shows that, he probably has these right-leaning views, but he's able to, reach across the aisle and say, hey, like, you're this president, you're this liberal president, I might not agree with everything you have to say, but, I'm willing to do that. And one of the things he talks about is, it's not so hard to follow orders you disagree with when, you really appreciate the integrity that someone has. And I feel like McRaven is someone who has integrity, and I think he has the ability to bring out integrity in other people. So even if, there's a, Yang and McRaven come to some decision where, I don't know, it's, maybe they're both, they're compromising a little bit more than they would like to. They're still going to say, I know that this person's coming from good faith. I know that they're, coming from a place of, loving the country and loving the values of the country, especially. And I think that, that's going to be a really great thing when we have all these problems. And, it just seems like there's more tension and more, partisanship than, talk of solution.
Let's go 2.0 on that thought experiment too. What do you have, Brendan, issues that are more prominent to you or that you prioritize higher than other social issues that we face right now that you believe these candidates would be uniquely qualified to answer?
Mm-hmm. I do think that we're facing serious economic problems with, I think when Brett talks about the rent seekers, I think that's a very valid point. I think something like UBI would definitely help address that. And, UBI, when you look at something like welfare, you can look at lots of studies that say, it doesn't work. Maybe some studies say it does. With UBI, most of the studies that I've looked for, they all say, UBI works, it's, effective, and it's not wasteful. I think that what a lot of Republicans want is they don't want, big government that just wastes money on things that don't work. I think that's really the Republican fear when it comes to economics. And I think that UBI is something that both Republicans and Democrats can get on board with because it's efficient. I think, it works. And, I think what's great about engineering too is, maybe tomorrow the study comes out. It's like, it doesn't work. All these studies have this big problem. I think engineering would be someone who would be able to say, let's look for a better economic solution. Maybe, there are other solutions out there. But yeah, I mean, engineering's prioritization of the economy, I think is really important and, one that I like about them a lot.
Dan, I don't want to leave you sitting idly for too long because it's just interesting. There's plenty to unpack about all of this. Same to you, what are the fundamentals, if we leave aside political strategy, why do your candidates satisfy what do you think is needed to be good leaders of the country?
Yeah. There's one quality that I think is essential, and that is humility. We need humble people, like you said, people who need to understand that they have blind spots. Everybody has blind spots. And I don't think we've had a president who is humble in decades. I mean, we don't have a president with an ounce of humility in decades. We also have to be looking for people who are not part of this sort of macho persona and this bravado that does not contain any intellect, does not contain any value, but it looks cool and it sounds cool and it sounds tough. And that's pretty much every candidate on the left and the right that we've been getting, whether it's Hillary Clinton, whether it's Bill Clinton, George Bush, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, with his aviator sunglasses in every possible picture that he can find. We have this like obsession with this macho persona and this bravado. And I think we have to be done with that. It's a very strange habit of Americans to fixate on people who have that quality. And I think it's a terrible quality. Demonstrate that you are macho and cool and bold through your actions, and let your actions speak louder than words. So I think we have to get rid of that, and I think it's infecting both the left and the right. So I would say humility and an end to this sort of macho persona. To me, it is essential to find somebody, at least one of these two candidates needs to be removed from politics, perhaps forever, perhaps never having been in politics, but at least removed for the past 5+ years. So that's, to me, a big advantage of Mitch Daniels is he's been out of politics and in the private sector for, I think, 7 years now. Anybody who has been in this system and in these political parties and working in Congress and working in various federal departments, they have almost assuredly have like this stink from the party that it's hard to wash off. I mean, that it corrupts people. So to me, having someone who is removed from that and removed from those influences is really important. And If I can, I'll mention somebody who I think also fits that profile. Is a man named Andrew Bacevich. And Andrew Bacevich is like a warrior scholar. He's kind of similar to Admiral McRaven. Andrew Bacevich has written tons of books. He's written a lot of books. He is a brilliant guy. He went to West Point. He served in Vietnam. He also went to Princeton. This is somebody who is very skeptical of. He's very skeptical of our interventionist policy. So he wants to kind of bring our troops home. He's center right. He's brilliant. He's extremely well spoken. He's not a strident guy. He's a coalition builder. He's currently president of something called the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, which is sort of a new way to look at foreign policy in the United States. He's written tons of books about foreign policy. And I think that, some people say, we can't, we need somebody with foreign policy experience and domestic policy experience, and they have to have served, in the Senate and the House. And I just think that's nonsense. I do think that we need somebody from outside of politics, and that's one of the good things about Andrew Yang. But we got that with Donald Trump. We got somebody who's outside of politics, businessman. Okay, so we fulfilled one of those things. But, it's okay to pick somebody who's outside of politics. And I think it's a good thing to pick somebody from outside of politics. But what we got with Trump is somebody who's outside of politics who has never thought deeply about any of these issues, whether it's the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, foreign policy, domestic policy, tax policy. This guy, I doubt he's read a book about foreign policy in his life. So it's okay to choose somebody from outside of politics and who doesn't have political experience, like an Andrew Bacevich, but they have to be somebody who has thought deeply about these things. And if it's someone like Andrew Bacevich, is somebody who's thought so deeply about them that he's written 6 or 7 books about these things. And gone and given speeches for years and years and years, and served in our military, and who lost a son in Iraq. So we need people who have had these conversations, whether it's over the dinner table, at some think tank, or written books. I like the idea of going out and finding a historian. Find a historian who understands this country and understands how we've succeeded, and also understands how we failed and how we can do better. So to me, like, the historian kind of thing is really appealing. But I think one of these two people really needs to be from outside of politics.
Mitch Daniels, Tulsi Gabbard, in a pinch are your selections. You're explaining that to the extent that we can keep populism and the dangers that come with it out of our movement and the things that we're creating, it's worthwhile to think about people completely outside of politics who, being outside of politics is in no way dismissing the fact that someone could be completely patriotic and knowingly so in the public eye. To sharpen that a little bit, some people voted for Trump, let's say, because they had never heard anybody talk about borders in a reasonable way before. And not that Trump talks about borders in a reasonable way, but perhaps he was making some of the noises that they were looking for. And so, close enough to what their persuasion that we'll go with it. That would be people voting in what I think is called a lexicographic kind of a vote. They have one issue that they're concerned about. Here's a candidate who speaks really well to that one issue, at least as a proxy for what I believe. I know from engaging with people who are both Trump supporters, which at the onset of his being elected, I couldn't understand why a sensible person would vote for him. But I also knew that around 50% of the country voted for him. So it couldn't be the case that there were 50% of the country who were just completely evil, bad people, or all unintelligent. That seems to be, and this is an N of one, this is my own experience, but it seems to be that that's why people would vote for a candidate despite possible destruction that he could cause or she could cause otherwise. Do you have, Dan, specific issues that you see needing to be addressed and that make your candidates and potential candidates, or whomever you choose, uniquely qualified to be able to address those things?
Yeah. I think that there are a lot of things that we need to do domestically, and so I think we almost need to have somebody who has those domestic who has the understanding of the domestic side, and somebody who has the domestic understanding of the foreign policy side. I think um, I think now more than ever there seems to be something brewing, and we are getting closer and closer to either a foreign conflict or a domestic conflict. But we have um, we seem to be very close to some kind of a military conflict somewhere. So to me, having somebody who understands the military, but who is outside of the military industrial complex as we talk about, and who has a different perspective than all these generals and politicians who are really connected to the defense industry, and the lobbyists that go along with that, and just the mentality that America is the police of the world, and that's what we have to do. So to me, that makes Andrew Bacevich really the perfect candidate in terms of foreign policy. I think Mitch Daniels would also be pretty good with that, but Tulsi would be excellent from a foreign policy perspective. So to me, I see huge foreign policy hurdles ahead, and we need somebody who understands American foreign policy, including American foreign policy going back for a century or more, because although our recent presidents seem to not really understand American history, um, our enemies do, and our enemies remember things like what happened, in the early 1900s or the late 1800s. They understand, and there are certain slights that have taken place throughout history, by America towards others. That we need a president who understands those things. We need a president who understands how we've stumbled in foreign policy. So to me, having a historian or having somebody who at least has demonstrated a knowledge of those events is really important. And I don't think we've had a president or a presidential candidate who's demonstrated that for many years. So I guess foreign policy would be probably my number one thing right now.
I'm curious, Brendan, if you want to respond to any of that, and it looks like you do. And but I'll throw the add-on in that Dan did smuggle in a Mulligan candidate there. So if you have any other ideas about, let's say your ticket doesn't work out, who would be interesting candidates, or if you would be willing to budge on your candidates.
Just to address what Dan said first, I would definitely be open to someone like Tulsi Gabbard, Mitch Daniels, or an Andrew Bacevich in something like the Secretary of State or Secretary of Defense positions. I think they could fit, very well there. And, even if you have someone like McRaven, who maybe is a bit more of a military person, if you have someone like Tulsi Gabbard as the Secretary of Defense, they're going to be able to address foreign policy in the way you're talking about. So, in those discussions, I would definitely be, open to something like that and support something like that. Sorry, what did you? I forgot what you asked me before.
I didn't want to lose this thread, but Dan pulled in a potential third premise or a third.
I see you're.
He would see as
I'm definitely more attached to Andrew Yang, just seeing him in the primary. I have much more experience with what he believes. Obviously, with McRaven, he hasn't been very political, so there may be some issues where he has some belief that I don't know about that would be a problem. So maybe someone like John Kasich, I would say, for to swap in with McRaven. Someone he has been a Republican, but he's taken a break from public life. He was actually offered by Donald Trump to run domestic and foreign affairs while Trump would make America great again. So, but he turned that down, which I thought was a really, really integrity move. So yeah, if not William McRagan, I would say someone like John Kasich.
Do you see any sensibility to selecting somebody completely outside of the realm of politics, but who clearly demonstrates wanting what's best for the state of our republic?
I mean, Andrew Yang is kind of outside of politics. I mean, he ran for president this year,
right.
But besides that, he founded Venture for America, which is a nonprofit trying to help restart the American economy after 2008. But really, not a lot of policy experience. But it's clear that if you go on the websites of the Democrats in 2020, he had the most policy positions of anyone. He was talking about stuff like, your privacy. He was talking about stuff like wildfires. He really cares about the issues that are facing America, not the issues that are sort of being talked about, which I think is important. For him, it's not just about, the appearance of making America better. It's actually about, what doing that and addressing things that maybe we're not talking about, because there's certainly issues that are, not seeing the light of day, like automation, that he's really, bringing out. So
So it's an asset. Brendan, you agree it's an asset to find somebody who's been outside of politics for a while, or who's never been in politics, right? I mean, to me, that's a huge asset of Andrew Yang.
yeah, yeah, I would agree. I would say that maybe I'm a bit more. I want someone to sort of stride the balance, or between establishment and sort of the people. So Andrew Yang, he was a CNN analyst, which is I think it shows that that he's willing to play ball, and but he's also not willing to compromise his beliefs, which I think is important, because you can't just say screw you to the establishment, because I mean those are the people that are in charge. So I think that, and I think the same thing with William McRaven. He's someone who can sort of bridge that gap between someone like an Obama, or a Bush or a Trump, and also someone who's just a regular American, who just wants someone who's has integrity and has all these values that people want the president to have.
We have these moments. I think all humans have these moments with their friends, with their neighbors, with their family, where we sit down at a coffee shop, or we sit down over the dinner table, or we sit at a bar, and we have discussions, like deep discussions about what's wrong with the world, what's going on in foreign policy, what's going on in domestic policy. And we have these fantastic, productive conversations where we feel like we found these great solutions. And we sit, and these can be people who are on opposite sides of the political spectrum. And at the end of the conversation, we have this thing where we say, right? We say, "Oh, I guess we solved all the world's problems," right? I think everybody's probably said that with somebody. It's like, "Oh, yeah, we just solved all the world's problems, ha ha ha." But that's reality, and that's what's so key about unity, is that it really doesn't matter too much who we choose, because anybody who is outside of that system, I mean, your neighbor, your buddy, your bartender who you just sat and had a conversation with, it's true that people who are outside of that system, who are outside of Washington, D.C., can sit and have a productive conversation and come up with creative solutions that none of our political candidates have been able to do for decades. And so we need to start taking more ownership of that, and realizing that those everyday people who have everyday jobs, who are entrepreneurs like Andrew Bacevich, who are entrepreneurs like Andrew Yang, and who are historians and authors like Andrew Bacevich, or who are presidents of a university. We need to start looking at these people, because there are brilliant people outside the political spectrum, and they don't have all these conflicting interests that prevent them from making good decisions. So I think to me that's evidence that we do need somebody from outside politics.
Yeah, I definitely share that sentiment. I guess my only concern comes from, that was the message of Trump, right? He was coming from outside of politics. And I think what sort of ended up happening is that he surrounded himself with sort of these, Wall Street stooges, or people like John Bolton, who've been, in politics for years. So even though he really wasn't, he was totally outside of politics, because he didn't really know any better, he surrounded himself with these people who were just sort of the same. Right. And I think that's also something to consider too. It's not just about, the person you elect, it's about who they're going to surround themselves with, because you can't, when analyzing a decision, you need people to give you options, tell you what your resources are. You need qualified people to do this, and if those people are just, if you're this, outsider coming in, but all the people you're talking to are insiders, you're going to effectively become an insider. So I think that,
Exactly.
I do share the sentiment of having an outsider, but I do also think you need someone who understands the political machine, and understands, and understands that on a deep level, so they can, try to use that when it is necessary, but then also say, hold on, this is a policy we pursued for, years, decades. It doesn't work. We need to, fix this.
I think that's basically what happened with President Obama. I think exactly what you said is true of President Obama too. He came in as an anti-war candidate, was going to bring our troops home, and he got a lot of center right votes because of that pledge. including I believe Andrew Bacevich voted for Barack Obama and his first term because he was going to take the troops out. But guess what he did? He kept President Bush's Secretary of Defense. He brought on Hillary Clinton, who is a war hawk. He brought in all of these people who believed the opposite of what he allegedly believed. And guess what happened? He escalated certain wars. He got us involved in more engagements abroad. He didn't get us out of any of the conflicts. So you're totally right, and that's another thing that's beautiful about the Unity campaign is, they're not going to be beholden to these donors and things like that for ambassadorships and different positions in the cabinets and things like that. And our two candidates, they're going to have to satisfy the Unity voter base, which is from the left and the right. And they're not going to tolerate putting, these hyper partisans like John Bolton or Hillary Clinton in the cabinet. They're not going to tolerate it. And so they'll be forced to actually find capable people from all walks of life, scholars, authors, historians, psychologists, brilliant people. We have the greatest academics in the world. Everybody in the world wants to go to college in the United States of America. We have the best universities. We have the best academics. We have the best think tanks. And yet, none of these people ever rise to the top of our political leadership. And none of these people rise to the top of our foreign policy leadership. The only people who rise to the top are these people who work within the system, who work within the parties, and who are corrupt.
There is, to the extent that we have anything worth being grateful for in our lives, and I think that probably the three of us, without knowing either of you, could mention a few. It has come to be within the system that we're talking about. And so, at a time where we see perhaps the most radical of the left saying, in essence, burn it all down, and the most radical in the right saying, we're going to preserve whatever these values are that we hold to be true, no matter what anyone else thinks needs to change. We're talking about wanting to preserve. I think Eric Weinstein said it very well the other night in a discussion with Brett. He said a lot of people want to just tear it all to the ground, screw the establishment, without doing the courtesy gesture of trying to fix it all first. And so I think that leads pretty well into this next question, and I hope it's not leading, but us three right now are talking as though it had to be like that the candidates should be center right and center left. And I think that we've all been sort of, as a group of volunteers who have been acting on behalf of this movement, have a pretty good understanding of why that would be the case and why that's a good idea. But let me just address that and float that concept out there. A lot of people that I've been talking to have been asking, why center left and center right? Why not voices that represent, fringe would not be the right word, but the outskirts of those parties and maybe beliefs that lie outside of those parties? And I'll throw that to either one of you who want to answer why you think it might be sensible to nominate people who already occupy the right and the left.
I'll take a shot at it because I've thought about this a lot. I think that we are limited by our vocabulary. We're really limited by our vocabulary, and there's big problems with the words liberal and conservative in the United States. Those words have been bastardized by both sides. They barely mean what they originally meant. And so it's very hard to find the right words and the right phrases to describe what we're looking for. Center right and center left is sort of the easiest way to get to the point and can get someone to understand what you're trying to say. I prefer to say, I wrote an article about this, that, what we're really looking for is not center right or center left. We're looking for asymmetrically right and asymmetrically left. And what I mean by that is, Dr. Weinstein is not a moderate. He regularly calls himself a radical. I believe I'm a radical. I think that being radical about certain things or very, very strong in certain positions is not a bad thing. But you're looking for somebody who is asymmetrically right and asymmetrically left, meaning that you have somebody who has certain opinions that fall on that sort of traditional conservative right-wing sort of platform. And they also have a couple of issues where they don't they don't fall on that. They're more to the left of the spectrum, and it's kind of strange. But you have to dig deeper and ask them about that, and they have deep thoughts on it and why it is like that. Those are really the most interesting people, and to me, the most intelligent people are those that they're not so easily placed in that right quadrant or that left quadrant. And there are certain things where because look, 15 years ago, the conservative position was you go to war very easily, and you go and try to overthrow dictatorships and instill democracy in these different countries. That ain't the conservative position anymore. So these things change, and they're not fixed. And to find to always be going after these candidates who have these fixed positions of, oh, he's right on he's on the right on abortion, he's on the right on immigration, he's on the right on economics, he's on the right on taxes, he's on the right on foreign policy. This is ridiculous. You want somebody who is a deep enough thinker to understand that your ideology is not so simple that you can just so easily be labeled right or left. You have to be flexible, and you have to be radically open-minded to understand the context of the situation and choose the best path forward, whether it is right or left.
I'm going to tip my hand a little bit, Brendan, as I turn that to you. I'm going to bet the farm, too, that you have a decent answer to this, but why? I live in Burlington, Vermont. I am a progressive liberal, and I'm probably I'm certainly living in a bubble of progressivism here in Vermont. Even the things that I lean right on with respect to what it means to lean right in my state are probably nationally seen as pretty progressive. Why should I, as a progressive, not be worried that the person who's going to act as an avatar for me is either on the center right or center left and not more deeply progressive?
That's a good question. I think you want someone who understands the entirety of the left and the right. And I feel like most people in politics, they sort of understand their little corner, right? The establishment people, they understand the establishment, and sort of the progressives kind of understand each other. The people on the right who are a little bit more conservative, they understand each other. But I think when I hear center left, what I'm thinking is someone who understands what it means to call yourself left, what it means for an American to call themselves left, what it means for an American to call themselves liberal. And that includes people like progressives, but also includes people who are maybe just, middle of the road Democrats who just sort of, they check the boxes every year. They sort of believe in things like abortion, like increasing the social services, climate change, those sorts of things, but they're not they're not for the Medicare for all. That's and I think that someone who's able to understand all of those different aspects of the left or the right, whichever it may be, I think that's really important. So as a progressive, I think you're going to get someone who is going to understand you, but also understand other people who may not exactly agree with that same position.
This is a tricky one. I like the idea that Eric has taught me about, which is steel manning. We're all basically in some sort of vague agreement here. I guess not about who we would like to see as candidates. For either of you, are there qualities, first of all, that you think would absolutely, let me put it this way, are there candidates or people who could easily be seen as people who would fit the bill, who you would not like to see run? I mean, what would be the defining factor of somebody who you would not allow into the ballot in your mind?
I mean, considering the two candidates we have, I think most people would just be willing to go for, whatever. I mean, that's kind of the whole point of this movement, right? I mean, doing it so late, normally, you start running 2 years in advance. I think the reason why this movement has a chance is because the people who we have are so bad. So, is there a candidate that I just absolutely wouldn't vote for? I really don't think so. I haven't heard any proposals where I was like, nope, like not doing that. That person is just crazy out of their mind. In terms of, there's some people who've been mentioned who I maybe don't think are such a great fit. Maybe people like Dan Crenshaw, Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, those sorts of folks, and kind of break those down. I think Dan Crenshaw is kind of just bit of an establishment Republican. I don't really see what he's bringing to the table that's unique, that's some sort of perspective that's going to challenge what's going on. I think that's what it's really about. It's about challenging the duopoly, and I don't know if Dan brings that perspective. In terms of Ben Shapiro, I think he's a good political pundit, but I don't really think we need a political pundit as president. Maybe if he ran for Senate, and and later down in his career, he's also really young. He's like 36. So later down the line, we could consider someone if he maybe took some political steps. But right now, I'm not really thinking so. And then someone like Joe Rogan. I mean, Joe's great, but he doesn't want to be president. He doesn't want it. So yeah, I mean, but I think any of those people that I just named, even though I just criticized them, I think any of those people are better than the options that we have.
So the idea of selecting somebody not based on necessarily their political repertoire, but just the content of their character legitimately is appealing to you. You don't see some of those candidates that people are floating as proposals, like Joe Rogan. You don't see that he would be completely qualified. For one reason, maybe he wouldn't want to do it. But for another reason, is he somebody who's really set out to, go through a presidential run into the indefinite future? What do you think about that, Dan?
Yeah. I guess getting back to your original question, the things that would be like a red line for me that I could not support them is one thing I would say is celebrities. I've seen a lot of celebrity names thrown around. I mean, Joe Rogan is one of them, but there's been several celebrities like The Rock and things like that thrown around. Yeah. I think we have to avoid celebrities on the left and the right. I think it's really important, and it's not to say that these guys are not smart. It's not to say that Dwayne Johnson is not an intelligent, good, patriotic man. I'm sure he is. He does say some intelligent things. He's well spoken, but we need to choose people who are going to be taken seriously, and we need to choose people who are going to represent us in a way that will make us be taken seriously. For better or worse, Trump has kind of ruined the celebrity brand, and I think we have to make sure that we avoid that no matter what. So I wouldn't like that. The other thing is, every politician we have now, almost all of them, regularly engages in ad hominem attacks, which means, they're attacking the person, not the position of the person. So anybody who's out there engaging in ad hominem attacks, and that is like probably 70-80% of Congress, if not more. It's all of the presidential candidates. These people are not they're not talking about issues. They're not talking about your positions. They're talking about you personally. And it's just ridiculous. So anybody who engages in ad hominem attacks is out. The other thing is, probably my red line is freedom of speech. I think that we can all agree that we are absolute freedom of speech, pro freedom of speech people. And this gets to something that I think is really important about unity, and what's brilliant about unity is that we've spent probably at least the past 30 years in America discussing issues like vouchers, like abortion, like taxes. And we've been discussing all of these sort of niche issues, and we've made zero progress. Nobody has changed anyone's minds. I mean, the needle has not moved to the right or to the left on any of these myriad issues. And so we've been made to believe by our media that, well, this must mean that we all hate each other, and you should hate your neighbor and suspect your neighbor as KKK or a Nazi or a communist or whatever. But in reality, I believe there is this huge majority of Americans who do believe in these fundamentally American things like freedom of speech, like checks and balances, like consent of the governed. And part of what unity does for me is it says to all these people, yes, we disagree on abortion. We disagree on some aspects of foreign policy. We disagree on some aspects of some really niche aspects of domestic policy. And it's really hard for us to make progress on them. But you know what? We agree on the fundamental things that make us American: freedom of speech, consent of the governed, checks and balances, and the importance of those. And we need to get together and remind ourselves that we agree on those things, because guess what? Our enemies, domestic and foreign, who do not believe in freedom of speech, who do not believe in consent of the governed, who do not believe in checks and balances, they're coming after us and they're recruiting people on the right and the left to join them to destroy those last few things that we actually agree on. And those last few things that we agree on are it's what makes America America. It's not that we're a pro-life country or we're a pro-choice country or we're a low-tax country or a high-tax country. It is the checks and balances. It is the consent of the governed. It is freedom of speech. It is those fundamental aspects. So part of what Unity is doing is saying, hey, look, we disagree on all these little niche topics, but let's reconvene. Let's reconvene here at an agreed upon location and re-emphasize and restate what we actually do believe in, because there are threats to those last few things that actually make us Americans.
So within those three, you see rational discourse, logic, critical thinking, and willingness to collaborate being among the virtues of any candidate, and not just saying that that's what we're doing and obviously, issuing out ad hominem attacks or doing whatever it takes to save face, but truly and genuinely and in good faith operating by those values and principles. In comes the steelman part that I was referencing earlier. It's not exactly this, but what do you think someone might say, or even what do you believe, Dan, would be what are the shortcomings of the candidates that you chose? We talked earlier about that we all have blind spots, we all have shortcomings to some extent. We could change the language of that and say areas for growth, maybe. But what would those be for your candidates that you've suggested?
Definitely for both guys on the center right. I think I chose one who's I want to say 60, like maybe I think I might have chose 2 70-year-olds, like one is 70 or 69 or something like that. So age is an issue. I mean, I think not to be ageist or anything like that, but we have been choosing our presidents and a lot of our leaders from the 70s, and these are really old people, and they have some old ideas, and they grew up in a generation that created a lot of problems for the United States. And so they have a lot of baggage, and I do think it's important to look outside of that generation. I mean, even our people. What's amazing to me is members of Congress regularly die as members of Congress. They die in Congress. Think about any other job. Most people aren't working until they die. They go away after a certain point. They realize, I'm probably too old to be doing this job. Probably there's somebody else who's a little bit sharper than me. I'm going to get out. So, but in politics, they regularly die in office, and I think that's a big problem. So, I guess age would be probably the biggest weakness. To tell you the truth, I really don't. That's the weakness that I see in my candidates. I've mentioned that Tulsi. It does concern me that that she's gotten this label as being this like pro-Assadist, isolationist type person. I don't think she is, but I guess that would be her weakness.
Same to you, Brendan.
Yeah, so with McRaven, I definitely see the concern that he's a bit too hawkish on war. And if he were chosen as a nominee, I would definitely like him to have a sit down with someone and just talk about that. Where does he see foreign policy now? What does he think of the foreign policy decisions in the past, and where does he see things going? And I think that would be really important, and understanding where he's going to, because there are some concerns there. In terms of Andrew Yang, I mean, running the federal government it's like running a million employee business. It's very difficult, and having no policy experience, I think that perspective is important. But also, if you have no policy experience, you're not used to dealing with the government. You're not used to being responsible for the United States. That's a really big burden. I think people they fail to consider that when thinking about president. Thinking about just sitting down in the Oval Office and saying, for the next 4 years, if anything goes wrong, it's probably my fault, and I probably have to respond to that. And that kind of pressure is, it's a very difficult job. So I would say that those are some of the concerns that I have, that I think that could be addressed if these candidates, we could have a sit down with these candidates and talk about their thoughts on being president.
Something interesting that seems to be coming from this talk, and I thought that it would, and it's that there's both an urgency among us to do something, to select people who are able and willing to take the helm of our country, and also there's an open-mindedness between you two, and I think among us about what it would look like and who fits that bill. So I'm hoping that our conversation today sparked an interest and an ability for people to think about just our thought process in selecting candidates, even more than the candidates themselves. And having said that, I wonder if, just to close, trying to assimilate anything that we've talked about or anything that maybe I've missed talking about, could each of you make one last plug for the candidates that you chose, maybe in a little more detail than the time that I left you at the top of the conversation? Dan, I'll start with you. Sorry.
Sure. Yeah.
That was random, just to choose someone.
No problem. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and just talk about I'll talk about the two center right people I mentioned. So for the two center right people I mentioned, Andrew Bacevich is a historian, kind of I like to say like warrior scholar, president of the Quincy Institute for responsible statecraft. Somebody who has the conservative bona fides. He is a right of center guy, but whose institute calls for progressives and conservatives and across the political aisle to help improve our foreign policy. And right now we have foreign conflicts in our future. We have problems coming our way, and I think it's really important that we have somebody who understands not just the present situation with American foreign policy, but what has been the situation with American foreign policy going back 200 years. So I think that's where Andrew Bacevich is uniquely qualified. With Mitch Daniels, I believe that he is somebody who has called for coalition building between the right and the left. He has been someone who has been willing to set aside issues that he knows are just too emotional for people, for Americans currently to make any progress or to make any compromise on right now, and focus on things where we can make some progress. He has that experience, and both of them are very intelligent people who believe in those fundamental things that make us American, and checks and balances, and freedom of speech and consent of the governed. And if there are people who disagree with them on abortion or disagree with them on tax policy or other things, they're not going to tear that person down. They're not going to conduct ad hominem attacks. They're going to, talk about the policy and debate the policy, and they might make some compromises. So I believe that that's those center right guys, and I believe that's also true of Tulsi Gabbard. I think that Tulsi Gabbard has demonstrated, even though she is pretty far left, as I believe Andrew Yang is, has some very far left policy ideas. These are people who are radically open-minded and who can, go on a conservative's podcast or, have a productive conversation with somebody on the right. And so even though, I think that some of their ideas are super far left wing, and I really don't care for them at all, I could probably have a productive conversation with them about them, and I could probably change their mind about some things, and they could probably change my mind about some things. And that's the kind of person that I want in the White House.
Floor is yours, Brennan. I'm sorry that I cut you off before you nearly volunteered to be the opener here.
No, it's fine. I know that we sort of set strategy aside at one point, but I sort of want to bring that back in. I think if this is going to work, you need people with name recognition, and you need people with good name recognition, who can stand up to scrutiny. And I think that I definitely considered the policy implications and the character and the integrity of the person in choosing Yang McRaven, but I also think that they will stand up to the scrutiny of the media, and that and I think that's a really important thing when it's a little less than 3 months out from the election, right? If they can immediately just discredit someone, it's going to be a huge blow to the movement. And these people, Andrew and William, they've sort of been in the public eye for a little bit, and there hasn't really been any major critiques that I would just say, wow, that's devastating. They hold up to public scrutiny, and I think that on top of their character, and their accomplishments. I think that's something that's really important and something that we need to consider in our thought process.
Either of you think that I left anything obvious or crucial out of our conversation that you'd like to jump in and correct me on here?
I feel pretty good. I think we had a good chat.
Yeah,
I, for
I
one,
agree.
I'm sitting down thinking about this conversation and imagining it happening on like Fox News or CNN. I would vote for both of you if you were qualified. I don't know if you are, but
Yeah, neither network would probably ever allow us on, unfortunately.
all right. Well, hopefully we can change that. And if nothing else, people may agree with little of what we said, nothing, maybe some parts and not others. But thank you both for sticking your neck out there and being willing to just give a stab at trying to solve a problem that's obvious and ubiquitous, but nobody seems to be brave enough to come out and speak against. So thank you again, both of you, so much.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks, Brennan.
It's a pleasure. Yeah.
All right, that's all for today. I want to thank again my guests, Dan Jones, Brendan Bacon, for participating in a brave conversation. And thank you all for tuning in to Unity Now. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel or subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast app to learn more about the Unity movement and to nominate your choice candidates. Visit the website articlesofunity.org or whatever other relevant links our producers offer you in the show notes. And be sure to look out for clips from our shows and join us for next week, episode 4, as this process is happening at warp speed. See you soon.